Let food be your medicine. As you know, food is the basis of our health, so it has to be healthy and correct. But above all, there has to be information, a real education on proper eating behavior. Guests of Make Food. Be Your Medicine are Dr. Christian Orlando, molecular biologist expert in nutrition and sports supplementation. Welcome, and Adriano Panzironi, writer and science popularizer. Welcome back. The topic of this episode is one in which we can have a very wide range of ideas because we are going to talk about the perfect diet. We introduce it like this.
In an increasingly fattening world, the word diet has now become very familiar to such an extent that an estimated 17 million Italians in their lifetime are periodically on a diet, and as many as 7 million of these claim to be currently on a diet. This veritable craze is a mirror of a society that no longer seems to have a limit to food intake, a real restorative attitude which very often results in continual failure. The market then puts its own spin on it, promoting all sorts of diets, promising miraculous results, which then more often than not result in real disappointments. Here then are in perversion diets such as the Zone, Atkins, Dukan, the soup diet, the Paleolithic diet, the water diet, the super metabolism diet, all alternatives to the better-known Mediterranean diet, whose ineffectiveness, however, leaves the way open to increasingly imaginative solutions.
With increasingly imaginative diets, then we'll talk about it, we're going to develop this topic. First of all, I want to ask our Dr. Orlando, what is a diet?
So, a diet is defined as a correct, healthy, and balanced diet that must meet the conditions, let's say, the physiological needs of an organism. Of diets there are, let's say, so many people have stuffed their mouths in this word, too many I must say, because let's say a person tends to imagine with the term diet slimming, it is done to lose weight. So you go, let's say tendentially diets are low calorie because that's what is done, but without going to look at whether you then take foods, inflammatory or non-inflammatory foods, because the goal is to lose weight, then as I lose weight, I lose weight. This is not correct because I have to think about keeping the person healthy as well as making them lose weight, in short. So that's the problem, because most diets then go to, let's say, maintain a fairly important amount of carbohydrates, low-fat dairy, because then fat, precisely as we've been told since the 1950s, is bad for you. And so again, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, dairy, eggs. In short, that tends to be more or less it, however you starve the person. In fact, diets usually last for a fairly short period of time, and then you end and take back what one has lost more interest, because then that's essentially what happens. But again, the goal of a nutritionist should not be this, but to properly lose weight while keeping the body healthy, so without giving these inflammatory foods and without starving the person, because then the person gets tired and doesn't follow you anymore.
So, Mr. Panzironi, getting to the ideal weight without creating damage to our body.
I would say it is deeper than that in the sense that, unfortunately, medicine has appropriated a word that is diet, which in Greek means lifestyle, and they have turned it instead into something that the doctor has to recommend in order to lose weight. Actually, diet is lifestyle. And as such, the lifestyle should be what we start on the first day we are on this earth until the last day we decide, or the good Lord decides, that we should leave it. I mean, in any case, it is a diet that you have to follow for your whole life, and the maintenance of body weight is the normal consequence of a proper diet. So the concept of dieting really has no reason to exist, because just when you induce a person to follow a restrictive diet, inevitably we go and alter a whole series of hormones, including the thyroid hormones. So inevitably, when we stop following that diet, when by then that diet is no longer effective because our body gets used to that lack of calories, This then induces a lowering of our ability to consume the calories we introduce. And so when we go back to eating what we used to eat, all we do is regain the pounds we lost plus interest, because our body takes a number of weeks to regain that sense of energy metabolism. So inevitably, we are forced by our body to accumulate more weight, and then in the form of fat. So the concept of dieting is wrong, because dieting, people imagine it as something restrictive that they have to do in order to lose weight. So there is absolutely no health consciousness when dieting, but mostly in the hope then to go back to eating the same things that made her fat before. So you don't have to delude people from that point of view and simply tell them, I have to educate you to understand what foods are good for you and what foods are bad for you.
Foods that are good for you and foods that are bad for you. So we are not, however, going to talk today about alternative diets, vegan, vegetarian, or whatever, but we are really going to talk specifically about slimming diets. And as our video said a little while ago, there are the slimming diets with the fanciest names. Our editorial staff has pulled out some of them, whether high protein, single issue, the lemon diet, honey diet, soup diet, rice diet, banana diet, weekend liquid cleanse diet, Montignac diet, hollow protein diet, plank diet, Scarsdale diet, South Beach diet, etc., etc. Not to mention the food fads that have been going on over the years, starting with Weight Watchers, depurative, supermetabolism, gastric tube, then gastric tube, blood group, zone, points, Todisco, in short. So many and all very imaginative. I want to ask Mr. Panzironi, the Life 120, where it fits in the midst of this chaos, if you will allow me, of diets, of names.
It is placed to the primordial concept of diet, i.e. lifestyle. Not surprisingly, Life 120 provides, in addition to a conscious diet in line with that of the hunter and gatherer's diet, also has to perform a conscious supplementation and physical activity done in a certain way. So it is really a lifestyle. It cannot be identified as a diet. A diet are just food advice or food sheets. So it comes out of this whole logic of defining diet and reappropriates that original concept of the Greek word diet, which means lifestyle.
You both talked indirectly or directly about the famous yo-yo effect, which a weight loss diet creates, right? That of losing weight, then gaining it back, losing it again, etc. Because then diets are not then done forever, or at any rate, once the target is reached, the target is left, and then you regain all that you had lost, maybe even with more, with a higher percentage. So I want to show you this video that explains and gives us an important insight into why diets fail. Let's watch it together.
When we introduce sugar-rich foods into our bodies, we activate the hormone insulin, which removes glucose from the blood and promotes the energy production of glycolysis. Excess sugar, however, induces other metabolic pathways that involve the uptake of glucose by the liver and related production of LDL cholesterol and the assimilation by fat cells of excess sugars. In fact, fat cells on the legs and buttocks of women and in the belly of men induce so-called gynoid or android obesity, respectively. In contrast, when we eat fats, the cells in the gut produce lipoproteins, called chylomicrons, which will transport fats to the cells that require them to produce energy, while any excess will be transferred to the fat cells in the subcutaneous skin.
So if fat is not fattening, what is fattening? Who's going to answer me? Dr. Orlando?
Yes, fats are not fattening because they are actually fattening carbohydrates, what we were never told. Because carbohydrates, as we have seen, induce a whole series of reactions, including water retention, which is one of those factors for which I use the term we swell up like chickens, in the true sense of the word, because the cell fills up with water and therefore increases in volume and size, as well as we go to assimilate and therefore maintain in our bodies that amount of fat that is present anyway, because although most diets make people eat a small amount of fat, but it is there. So, and even that small amount is, I repeat, stays within our body and is assimilated, is deposited at the level as visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, etc., which then is the most difficult part at the time when one wants to lose weight, to take off at the time when, again, doing a traditional low-calorie diet, because in any case, in traditional low-calorie diets, you always go to favor a much larger amount of carbohydrates than the amount of fat, simply going to lower calories and therefore going to create, as we said before, also that imbalance at the hormonal level, at the thyroid level, which then in the long run will make us take back all that we have. So I repeat, it's actually the carbohydrates that, in addition to keeping the fluids inside the cells, induce us an accumulation of fats inside the very adipocytes, the fat cells both at the visceral and subcutaneous level. And that's what we are then most unlikely to lose.
Mr. Panzironi, what do you think? It seems to me that you, with these results, with this information, more than results, you have created a way of life.
Then I believe that then, in the end, regardless of what we say, what matters is the scientific information, because we are scientific popularizers, so it really takes very little to understand how carbohydrates act on metabolism compared to fats. By now, it's information that has been around for decades, so only those who don't want to see it don't encounter it. Let's take a very trivial example. When we eat carbohydrates that are then converted into glucose, we activate insulin. Insulin has a specific role towards cells, both our normal cells in our body, by inducing glycolysis and then forcing them to take up sugar. So when these cells take up sugar, they are not able instead to use the fat that normally the chylomicrons collect from the gut, and they are the ones that should release the fat to the cells to produce the normal daily energy. This instead cannot happen at the time when the cell is forced to use glucose by insulin, of course. From the point of view of the adipocyte cells, is the even worse thing, because there are two adipocytes, two different forms of adipocytes. One is the white adipocyte, which is called VAT, and the brown adipocyte, which is called BAT. The difference between these two adipocytes is that the former has a very large vacuole and very few mitochondria, and its job is to store fat. And how does it store it? Through insulin, which increases the transport of glucose within these cells. These cells turn glucose obviously into fat, and then these fat cells are formed, which are then the basis of the adipocyte cells that we find in humans. So we have seen of the type of obesity in women on the buttocks and legs, in men, in the abdomen, and so on. Those are VAT cells, that is white type cells. On the contrary, BAT cells, on the other hand, are the ones that have more mitochondria. Why do they have more mitochondria and have a lower fat storage? Because the simple fact is that they are cells that have to use that fat to produce through calories the heat of our body, so they preserve us from the cold example. And so there are studies very now known by a scientific tourist that show that insulin even transforms BAT cells into VATs. So it means that instead of making us dissipate that energy by making us consume and therefore prevent the fattening of both the cell and our body, it actually brings about a transformation of these cells into real storage cells, and therefore inevitably we accumulate fat.
So we have talked about the fact that fats don't make you fat, but there is something else that does. So carbohydrates, however, at this point a doubt arises for me, and we see the doubt with the next video. Let's look at it a little bit.
When the war on fat by medicine began in the 1960s in the United States, the food industry invented a new category of foods with the designation light, that is, foods with limited calorie intake. Since then, our supermarkets have been filled with light foods, opening up a market that has had the highest growth rate in the food industry over the past 4 decades. Thus, we find products of all kinds, from cheeses to yogurt, from sweets to desserts, all light. Yet despite the fact that these foods are increasingly being used especially by people with weight problems, the phenomenon of obesity has increased in the last 40 years by 500%. So it really seems that these foods are not as good a deal for our health as they are for the companies that produce them, given the considerably higher price that these foods have on average compared to non-light foods.
Obesity has increased in the last 4 decades by 500%. This should give us pause for thought, especially since once fat was criminalized, light foods, then fat-free foods were created. Mr. Panzironi?
I think it was one of the biggest mistakes on the part of medicine and to follow of the companies that obviously do their work, which are the ones that produce the food. Because after the 1970s, when in America they launched this fad of fat that was dangerous because it was fattening, because one eats fat, one gets fat. In reality, it's not. And so what happens? It happens that, of course, the food industry follows fads and then also stimulates a certain need that didn't really exist. Because we can also use light foods, but if those foods then don't satiate us, because then that's another extraordinary task of fats, and to give us satiety. That's why fats don't make us fat, because when we eat fats, we basically take longer to digest in the stomach and in the intestines, and then we activate a hormone along with those cholecystokinin that is produced by the cells at the base of our stomach that alert us when the food stamp is emptied from the stomach. And since fats tend to stay in the stomach twice as long as carbohydrates, it is evident that when we eat fats right away, we have a production of cholecystokinin that turns off our hunger, unlike carbohydrate, which does not give us this signal. So we tend to eat more of it, and in the end, therefore, we eat more calories. Then, to have created light foods that have deluded the population, that by eating those they actually lose weight, has not solved the problem. Because if I don't eat a fat-rich food, I continue to be hungry, so I eat the light product, yes, but then I eat everything else afterwards.
So we understood that light products are a bit special. First of all, I want to make it clear that we, with this installment, do not want to criminalize either those who have devised the diet, those who follow it, but especially not even the manufacturers of light foods, because we are only here to examine evidence in hand, what is obviously on the market and what society offers us right now. Yeah, so speaking of light foods, and for some time now, we also find on foods on the shelves of our supermarkets the word sugar-free. The word sugar-free, so in sugar-free cookies, no added sugar, no sugar, and so on. The problem then comes from another factor, because I may not even put in the real sugar portion, so of the sweetener, the sweet part. However, we have 60-70% of flour, which then, Dr. Orlando, what does this 70-80% of flour become?
It becomes sugar within our body, nothing more and nothing less. It is an important thing. In addition to the fact precisely that fats, as we said, induce us satiety and that carbohydrates induce us addiction. So sugar requires carbohydrate sugar because it goes to alter our hormones, especially at the brain level. And in fact, the patients that I follow, most of them tell me this, doctor, but I need to eat some sugary things during the day. And that's because those who can detoxify then eliminate them quite completely. So like in quotes, an addict. Because then it's the same thing, manages to detoxify properly. But if not, the force of these sugars is so impactful, important at the brain level, that a detoxification, so not coming off them, is difficult if they are not eliminated properly and almost completely.
Mr. Panzironi, there are various scientific researches that have equated sugar addiction, cocaine addiction.
So what the scientific research tells us is that when we eat carbohydrates, so we have a glycemic spike, through insulin we stimulate serotonin production. People who have problems with depression know perfectly well that the drugs that are recommended or given to these people are drugs that prevent serotonin reuptake. What does this mean? That a neuron releases a molecule of serotonin into the synaptic vallus of another cell. And as long as this serotonin is basically red, there is a classical effect of serotonin, that is this emotional well-being. The problem, however, is what? that when I eat carbohydrates, I have a spike in serotonin, but soon after to follow then the glycemic drop via norepinephrine and cortisol, we have the entry of norepinephrine inside the synaptic vallus, and serotonin is driven out. This is what is involved, these emotional up and downs that are then the basis of people's depression and dissatisfaction. So stressed people who have precisely this excessive presence of norepinephrine, what do? They try to eat sugary things to feel this phenomenon of emotional calmness, which, however, is only a palliative. It is a drug. Then in the end, so many people who turn to drugs, why do they do it? They do it because they need to feel moments of ecstasy, or at least calmness, or to get these worries that they have that are bothering them to fade away. And then they try to stabilize the mood, but they do exactly the opposite because the mood goes to make it worse.
In our small way, our editorial staff did a little investigation, and we went to a supermarket and looked at some of the products that we quietly find in the various sections of the supermarket. Let's go and see what we found out.
We went into one of the supermarkets of the S. Lunga chain and looked for those products that with their packaging might lead the consumer to consider them as diet products. For example, here we have light muesli that says no added sugars, yet looking at the nutritional table we see that they contain 66.5% carbohydrates. Or Nestlé's cornflakes that with their fitness name and the image of an enviable silhouette drawn on the package induce the idea that cornflakes are a diet product while they contain 76% of carbohydrates. Even products such as Weight Watchers crackers, whose name induces consumers to think they are buying diet products that if we see well the carbohydrates are 74%. The same goes for Slim Life shortbread. From the name would make people think of a product that is not fattening. Yet looking at the nutrition chart, they have 71% carbohydrates. Or the Monviso cookies called health cookie just because they have toasted grains but the carbohydrate percentage is still 74%.
So it's just a marketing thing.
I would say yes, because it's obvious that when, for so many years, for decades, the doctors themselves tell you that you should avoid white sugar as if it were the worst enemy of our health. However, then they don't tell you that the carbohydrates you eat after 2 hours turn into glucose in the blood, exactly as refined sugar does. This is misinformation. So behind this misinformation, also from the medical scientific point of view, are a whole series of companies that, in order to prove the healthfulness of their foods, in short, the foods that are able to make you slim, simply remove white sugar from their formula to produce the breadfruit. However, in the meantime, they continue to use grains that are always 90% of the carbohydrates in foods.
So, Mr. Panzironi, the Life 120 diet has the famous pleasant side effect that is of slimming down. So I ask you right away what kind of diet we should follow. Maybe not to lose weight, but to stay in shape, that is, in our ideal weight.
The nutrition that nature has always provided for the human being. Yes, it is true that we are of citizens, we use the car, we are in the skyscrapers, all good. We have transformed from cavemen to modern citizens, but our body is exactly the same as that of a caveman, so our metabolism is made to use those foods that were provided in the Paleolithic era. So we talk about meat, fish, little fruit, because fruit sometimes for periods not even there was. If we think about the ice ages, vegetables, a few nuts, a few almonds, we always talk about nuts, a few tubers, but very rarely. And this is the diet that we as Life 120 have brought back, obviously in vogue, and we have in quotes improved it, allowing a little bit of everyone to be able to follow this lifestyle. But then again, the percentage of nutrients must be the same as it was provided for primitive man.
So the Life 120, we say again and again, is not a high protein diet. It is not for losing weight, but it has the pleasant side effect, which is to return, that is not of losing weight, but of returning to the ideal weight.
Yes, basically what happens in nutrition in the Life 120 lifestyle. If a Mediterranean diet that is considered by the best in the world uses up to 60% carbohydrates, 25% protein, and 15% fat, we have reversed the formula. So we have fats going up to over 50% and carbohydrates are around 15 or 18%. And that means going back to eating what our body can metabolize without creating hormonal changes or dysfunction, obviously, of our cells and our metabolism.
And I come back to our Dr. Orlando, to whom I ask, of course, whether good supplementation, mindful supplementation like that, let's say, indicated by Life 120, so mindful supplementation can help us in this as well.
Definitely conscious supplementation helps us, because anyway, the supplement concentrates the positive part of each food. Example, the omega-3 found in fish. Many people tell me, doctor, I eat fish, but as much as one can eat fish, I see the amount of omega-3 present in the supplement, aside from being pure, so only omega-3. But it would be present in, example, 1 kilogram of fish. The same thing with vitamin C, where we would have to eat 80 kilograms of oranges to have a few grams of vitamin C. So supplementation is essential to concentrate, again, the positive part of each individual food and have it in a correct and balanced way.
Mr. Panzironi, I see with you the book, Living to 120, the healings, the observational scientific study that confirmed the Life 120 lifestyle, the benefits of the Life 120 lifestyle, what result we have achieved as a result of Life 120 in terms of losing weight, or at least weight shape.
Within this scientific study, we have 0 people who were interviewed, people on average over the age of 50. So it is obvious that almost all of them, as is the case in any other population in the world, you have a presence of significant overweight and obesity. So although Life 120 is not a diet, so it is not for weight loss, I always say it is an obvious side effect that when you eat well, you lose that weight that has been accumulated with the wrong diet. And so we ask people, of course, we all weigh ourselves to see, but especially when you start to change your lifestyle, it's obvious that you also tend to check whether or not it has an effect on your weight. And so we asked women and men to tell us the initial weight before doing Life 120. And then at the time of the interview, when we decided to involve in this observational research, the results are really extraordinary. Think that in the women, 57% were either obese or overweight. We are talking about 31% overweight and 26% obesity. And well after the diet change, the obesity went from 26% of the sample to 9.7. Here, of course, we are talking about obesity. Not going to define what class of obesity, because anyway, people still lost some weight and maybe came from obesity of the 3rd type to obesity of 1 type, but still correctly we had to include them among the obese people. The overweight dropped from 31 to 22. Extraordinary is the fact that if before in this group of women there was only 41% who were normal weight, we got to 68.4, so 30 percentage points more returned to normal. As for men, we know that men tend to lose weight faster and in any case are less overweight. Obesity among obesity, in any case in this sample even was higher. Obesity and overweight had gotten to 70% of the sample. Obesity went from men. Here's the phenomenon of more slimming by men. Obesity went from 31% to 5%, so there was a reduction of 80% of the people who came out of obesity. From overweight went from 39 to 30. And here it says that a good part of the obese then became overweight. So they went to the lower class. But overall, the group of men, if before 70% were either overweight or obese, after starting this Life 120 lifestyle, dropped this percentage to 35%. That is, it dropped by half.
Dopo aver iniziato questo stile di vita al 120 è sceso questa percentuale al 35%, cioè si è dimezzata.
So very good results. Let food be your medicine. This episode is also over, so I want to thank our Adriano Panzironi, science popularizer and writer, and then I want to thank Dr. Cristiano Orlando, molecular biologist, expert in nutrition and sports supplementation.